The Galactic Empire arrived in the solar system with the calm confidence of rulers who had never failed before. Their fleet filled the dark space near Earth like a floating continent. Massive warships stretched for kilometers. Tall metallic towers rose from their surfaces like cold mountains. Bright banners of glowing light displayed the Empire's symbol across space, a sign that thousands of civilizations had already surrendered to them. For most species in the galaxy, this moment meant the end of independence. For humanity, it was just another Tuesday. Exactly at 0900 Universal Time, every human communication network received the same message. Phones vibrated, screens lit up. Satellites echoed the signal across Earth, Mars, Luna, and the distant colonies. The voice that spoke was deep, steady, and powerful. "I am High Executor Valen of the Seventh Dominion, voice of the Galactic Empire. Your species has been observed and evaluated. Your technology is primitive compared to ours. Submit peacefully, and you will be allowed to exist under imperial protection as a vassal civilization." Behind the words was something else, an invisible pressure hidden inside the signal. The Empire had perfected it over thousands of years, a special frequency meant to trigger fear in the minds of weaker species. Usually, when that message played, entire planets surrendered within minutes. Inside the United Earth Defense Command in Geneva, the control room became completely silent. Hundreds of officers stared at their screens. No one spoke for 5 long seconds. Then a technician in the back snorted. Another officer covered his mouth, trying not to laugh. Then someone else chuckled, and suddenly the entire room exploded with laughter. Admiral Sofia Ramirez leaned back in her chair, wiping tears from her eyes. "Oh, wow," she said between breaths. "Are they serious?" A communications officer nodded while still laughing. "Yes, ma'am, our systems confirm it. That intimidation frequency? Classic Imperial tactic." The laughter spread quickly. Within minutes, the message leaked onto civilian networks. People began remixing the speech online. Someone added circus music to the background. Another edited flashing party lights behind the giant alien fleet. Memes appeared faster than the Empire could analyze them. "Galactic Empire calling about your extended warranty." "Breaking news, local planet gets its 37th Empire this century." "Speed run, conquer Earth, any percent." Back on the Imperial flagship Obsidian Mandate, confusion began spreading among the alien commanders. Their analysts watched human broadcasts with growing concern. "Fear response not detected," one officer reported. Instead, widespread amusement. High Executor Valen stiffened his long armored limbs. "Impossible," he said. "Rebroadcast the ultimatum." This time, the message returned louder, harsher. The threats became clearer. Refusal would lead to orbital cleansing, planetary destruction, complete extinction. The Empire waited. On Earth, a single open channel responded. Admiral Ramirez appeared on screen, still smiling. "Okay, hold on," she said, raising a hand. "Did you guys not read our history files before coming here?" Imperial analysts quickly marked the reaction as psychological instability, but they misunderstood something important. Humans were not laughing because they were weak. They were laughing because they recognized the situation, and they had seen it before. Across military networks, historians were already pulling up records. The Ultrax invasion, the Orion Coalition crisis, the 9-hour war. Every time someone powerful arrived expecting humans to panic. Every time it ended badly for the attackers. Civilians joined the conversation with excitement instead of fear. "Oh, great," one popular post read. "Another empire. What number is this now?" Meanwhile, the Imperial fleet waited patiently for surrender. Instead, humanity sent something unexpected. A single small ship drifted forward from Earth's orbit. Compared to the enormous Imperial warships, it looked tiny. The hull was scratched and uneven. Old armor plates were welded over newer ones. Extra engines had been attached in strange places. Imperial translators struggled with the ship's name. Finally, the system produced a rough translation: "Hold my beer." Inside the Imperial command bridge, several officers stared at the screen. "Is that a ceremonial vessel?" one asked. High Executor Valen narrowed his eyes. "No," he said slowly. The little human ship powered up its reactors. Weapons systems came online, but they were not normal weapons. The readings made no sense. Layer after layer of backup systems, redundant power grids, modular technology constantly shifting and adapting. One Imperial engineer whispered nervously, "Why does it have so many backups?" Another replied quietly, "Why would anyone need that many?" Then the human ship opened a channel. A cheerful voice spoke. "All right, big guys, quick demo first, then we talk." And across the empty silence of space, a human laugh echoed. The Imperial fleet prepared for battle, but none of them yet understood one simple truth. Humans did not laugh because they ignored danger. They laughed because danger was where their best stories usually began. The tiny human ship Hold My Beer suddenly accelerated toward the massive Imperial fleet, and what happened next would force the Galactic Empire to question everything they believed about humanity.
The small human ship Hold My Beer moved forward slowly at first. From the bridge of the Imperial flagship Obsidian Mandate, it looked almost harmless. Compared to the enormous warships of the Galactic Empire, the human vessel was barely noticeable, like a small insect drifting toward a mountain. High Executor Valen watched the sensor displays carefully. "Is that their warship?" he asked. One of the Imperial officers studied the readings. "It appears to be armed, but the weapon systems are unusual." "Explain." The officer hesitated. "It has too many of them." Valen tilted his head slightly. "That is not a problem." "Not exactly," the officer replied nervously. "Each weapon seems to be connected to multiple power sources, and every system has backup systems, and those backups also have backups." Another analyst added quietly, "And some of them appear to be homemade." The bridge fell silent. Homemade weapons were not a concept the Empire usually encountered. Imperial technology was precise, perfect, and carefully designed. Human technology, however, looked more like a collection of experiments that somehow survived. The little ship stopped about 10,000 kilometers from the front line of the Imperial fleet. Then it transmitted another message. Admiral Ramirez's voice returned. "All right, folks," she said casually. "Just a quick demonstration." "Demonstration of what?" Valen demanded. But the humans did not answer. Instead, the Imperial targeting systems locked on to the strange vessel. "Shall we destroy it?" one officer asked. Valen considered for a moment. "Yes," he said, "a single shot. Let them understand the difference between power and arrogance." A heavy Imperial cannon fired. The beam of energy shot across space faster than light could travel. But the human ship wasn't where it should have been anymore. It moved sideways, not quickly, just oddly. The beam passed through empty space. On the bridge, several Imperial officers blinked in confusion. "Target evaded." "That is impossible," another officer said. "The firing solution was perfect." The ship drifted again, almost lazily. Another cannon fired, missed. A third shot,
Missed again. Valen stared at the display. Why are we missing? One of the analysts slowly answered. The ship is not moving according to predictable patterns. What does that mean? It means it is moving incorrectly. Meanwhile, inside the human ship, the pilot leaned back comfortably in the chair. Okay, he said cheerfully over the internal comms. They're trying really hard now. An engineer laughed. Good, that means the sensors are working. Outside, the Hold My Beer continued its strange dance. It twisted sideways, then dropped speed suddenly, then boosted forward at an angle that made no tactical sense. Imperial targeting computers struggled to predict its path, but every prediction was wrong. The human ship finally responded, not with missiles, not with lasers. Instead, dozens of tiny signal bursts spread outward across the battlefield. Imperial sensors suddenly began receiving thousands of strange signals. False targets appeared everywhere. Some ships saw enemy vessels where there were none. Others lost targeting data completely. Several weapon systems shut themselves down automatically after detecting what they believed were dangerous internal errors. One officer shouted in alarm, "Our forward weapon grid is malfunctioning." Another added, "Safety systems are activating across multiple ships." Valen slammed one clawed limb against the console. "Stop those signals!" But it was too late. Half the Imperial fleet's targeting network had shut itself down, and the human ship had not fired a single lethal shot. After several minutes, the strange signals stopped. The Hold My Beer slowly drifted to a stop again in front of the Imperial formation. Its hull showed burn marks from near misses. Smoke vented from several damaged plates, but its reactors hummed calmly. Then the ship opened a channel. Admiral Ramirez spoke again. "Well," she said pleasantly, "that was fun." Valen's voice returned cold and sharp. "How did you do that?" Ramirez chuckled. "Oh, that?" She paused. "Trial and error." Another voice joined her, one of the human engineers. "Mostly error, but we're really good at surviving our mistakes." Inside the Imperial flagship, silence filled the command bridge. For the first time in Imperial history, the fleet had attacked a weaker civilization and somehow looked foolish doing it. Imperial historians immediately began studying human records. What they found made them uncomfortable. Humans had a strange habit. They experimented constantly. They built machines, broke them, rebuilt them, and tried again. They failed thousands of times before something worked. But when it finally worked, it worked very well. And apparently, they had been practicing this method for centuries. Back on Earth, the laughter had not stopped. Memes about the Empire missing their shots spread across the internet. One viral clip showed the Imperial fleet edited with dramatic music and the words, "Professional conquerors versus one guy who read the manual." But inside military command centers, the laughter was becoming quieter, more focused. Admiral Ramirez looked around the room. "All right," she said calmly. "Demo's done. Let's see what they do next." In the Imperial flagship, High Executor Valen slowly gave the order no Imperial leader had ever spoken. "Pull the fleet back." The bridge crew froze. "Retreat, my lord?" Valen stared at the human ship. "For reassessment." The Imperial fleet began slowly withdrawing from Earth's orbit. Across human networks, people celebrated, but Admiral Ramirez simply folded her arms. "They're thinking now, and that's when things get interesting." Because the Empire had just realized something dangerous. Humans were not afraid, and when humans stopped laughing, they usually started planning. As the Imperial fleet retreated to rethink their strategy, their analysts uncovered something terrifying in human history. This was not the first empire that had tried to conquer Earth, and none of them had survived the attempt.
The Imperial fleet retreated only a short distance from Earth,
For the Galactic Empire, this was already a shocking event. In thousands of years of conquest, imperial forces had never stepped back from a primitive civilization. But High Executor Valen was not a fool. Something about humans was wrong, or more accurately, unpredictable. Inside the command halls of the Obsidian Mandate, emergency councils formed. Sociologists, historians, and military strategists gathered around floating holographic displays filled with human data. The Empire had collected records before arriving. They had studied Earth's technology, its cities, its population, but they had made one serious mistake. They had ignored human culture. Now the analysts were reading it carefully, and the more they read, the more uncomfortable they became. An imperial scholar raised a trembling limb. "My executor, we may have misunderstood this species." Valen's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The scholar activated a holographic screen showing human footage. Old videos played in the air. Human soldiers laughing while artillery exploded around them. Astronauts smiling before launching into dangerous missions. Engineers cheering while a test rocket exploded and then immediately preparing another one. "Humans laugh during dangerous situations," the scholar explained. "That is obvious," Valen replied. "It is denial." The scholar shook his head slowly. "No, my executor." Another clip appeared. A group of human firefighters joking while entering a burning building. A racing driver laughing moments after surviving a terrible crash. A scientist celebrating a failed experiment. "Humans associate humor with stress," the scholar continued. "When they face danger, they laugh." Valen stared at the screen. "That is irrational." "Yes," the scholar said quietly, "but it is also very dangerous." Across the command room, another analyst spoke up. "We also examined their military history." The display changed again. Battles appeared one after another. Wars humans fought against each other. Wars against other powers. Wars where humans were weaker, but still won. Valen studied the data carefully. "They fail constantly." "Yes," the analyst said, "but they survive their failures." The holographic chart zoomed out. Human progress looked strange. Instead of smooth development, it looked like chaos, disasters, explosions, mistakes. But after every disaster, human technology improved. After every mistake, they adapted. After every failure, they tried again. An imperial historian spoke slowly. "My executor, humans treat failure as information." The room fell silent. In imperial society, failure was shameful. It meant weakness. It meant removal from power. But humans? Humans expected failure. They even joked about it. Meanwhile, across human communication networks, people continued making jokes about the Empire. One popular post read, "Day 1, Galactic Empire arrives. Day 2, Galactic Empire discovers humans read the instruction manual." Another post simply said, "Give them time. They're still in the confused alien stage." Back in the Imperial Council chamber, the discussion continued. Another analyst stepped forward. "There is something else." The display changed again. This time, it showed Earth's military vessels. But they did not look like the Imperial fleet. Imperial ships were identical, perfectly symmetrical, each one designed for a specific role. Human ships looked nothing like that. Each vessel was different. Some were large and heavily armored, others were small and fast. Some had experimental engines, others carried strange equipment that analysts could not identify. "It looks like chaos," one officer said. "No," the historian corrected, "it is adaptation." Another scholar added quietly, "Humans customize everything. Ships, weapons, strategies, Even tactics change from battle to battle. Valen watched the data silently. So we cannot predict them. Correct, the analyst replied. Valen finally spoke. Then we overwhelm them with order. He turned to the fleet commander. Prepare the second wave. The Imperial fleet began reorganizing. This time, the formation looked terrifying. Hundreds of warships aligned perfectly, weapons synchronized, targeting networks connected across the entire armada. Precision, discipline, absolute control. The Empire had defeated thousands of worlds with formations like this. On Earth, military command received the sensor reports. Admiral Ramirez looked at the display. "Well," she said calmly, "they're done thinking." An officer beside her nodded. "They're switching to full intimidation strategy." Ramirez smiled slightly. Classic Empire move. She tapped the console. Human ships across the solar system began powering up. But unlike the Imperial fleet, they did not form a neat armada. Ships launched from Earth, others arrived from Mars. Mining vessels from the asteroid belt joined them. Cargo ships, experimental craft, old military cruisers, private defense vessels. Each ship looked different. Each pilot had their own modifications. Instead of a perfect formation, the human fleet looked like a giant toolbox thrown into space. One young officer stared at the chaotic display. "Admiral, this formation makes no sense." Ramirez smiled. "That's the point." Across the battlefield, the Imperial fleet prepared their next move. Their analysts believed they understood humans now. A species that laughed under stress, a species that survived mistakes. But they had not yet discovered the most dangerous thing about humanity. Humans don't fight wars to prove power. They fight wars to solve problems. And the Empire had just become a very interesting problem. As the Imperial fleet prepared their perfect battle formation, thousands of unpredictable human ships began appearing across the system, and the Empire was about to learn why fighting humans was less like a battle and more like stepping into chaos. From the bridge of the Imperial flagship Obsidian Mandate, the view of the battlefield had become deeply confusing. High Executor Valen expected to see an organized human fleet forming in defense of their home system. Instead, the sensor display looked like someone had spilled pieces across the map. Human ships appeared everywhere. Some arrived from Earth, others from Mars. A group of vessels drifted in from the asteroid belt. Even more came from distant stations near Jupiter. But they were not forming lines. They were not aligning weapons. They were not following any visible battle doctrine. One Imperial officer frowned at the holographic display. "My executor, they are not organizing." Another analyst added nervously, "Some of their ships are moving in opposite directions." Valen leaned forward slowly. "That is not possible. They must have a command structure." "They do," the officer said carefully, "but it appears to be flexible." "Flexible," Valen repeated with clear irritation. "Yes, each ship is operating with partial independence." The display zoomed closer. The differences between human ships became obvious. One vessel looked sleek and modern, with bright engines and polished armor. Another looked old and heavily patched together, with extra weapons welded onto the sides. A mining ship appeared among them, carrying equipment that looked more useful for drilling asteroids than fighting warships. Yet somehow, all of them were armed. Valen studied the formation. "This is not a fleet," he said coldly. "No," one analyst whispered. "It's more like a swarm." Meanwhile, inside the human command center, Admiral Ramirez calmly sipped coffee. Around her, the tactical display showed hundreds of friendly ships appearing across the solar system. An officer looked at the screen with concern. "Admiral, our fleet formation is unusual." Ramirez chuckled. "That's a polite way to say it looks like a mess." "Yes, ma'am." She placed the coffee cup down and pointed at the Imperial formation. Now that was a fleet. Perfect rows of identical warships, every vessel spaced exactly the same distance apart, weapons aligned, energy systems synchronized. It looked impressive, it looked powerful, and it looked very predictable. Ramirez leaned back in her chair. They spent thousands of years perfecting that formation, she said. So we shouldn't break it? Ramirez smiled. Oh no, she tapped the console. We absolutely should. Across the human fleet, pilots began receiving simple instructions, not detailed battle plans, just small suggestions. Test their sensors, probe their defenses, distract them, make them move, and above all, stay creative. One of the smallest human ships accelerated forward first. It was a fast scout vessel named Shortcut. Instead of flying directly toward the Imperial fleet, it curved sideways and dropped behind a nearby moon. Imperial sensors tracked it immediately. Scout vessel detected, an officer reported. Valen nodded. Destroy it. A precise beam fired. The Earth exploded into debris, but the human ship had already moved again. Now it appeared somewhere else. Target reacquired. Another shot. Missed again. Then 3 more human ships appeared on the edge of the battlefield. One launched small drones. Another released clouds of reflective particles that confused targeting sensors. The third simply flew in circles, broadcasting loud music across open channels. An Imperial officer stared at the data. Are they playing music? Valen ignored the question. Focus fire on all forward targets. Imperial cannons fired in perfect synchronization, but every time they aimed at a target, the human ships moved somewhere unexpected. Some accelerated suddenly, others slowed down. A few ships even allowed themselves to be hit, but only lightly. Their armor flared brightly, absorbing the impact. Then they continued moving like nothing had happened. Inside the Imperial bridge, confusion began growing. They are not fighting. They are not retreating. What are they doing? Meanwhile, Admiral Ramirez watched the battle unfold. They're testing the Empire, she said calmly. Testing what? An officer asked. Ramirez smiled. Everything. Every maneuver forced the Imperial fleet to react. Every reaction revealed something. How fast their weapons could turn, how quickly their targeting systems adapted, how their formations adjusted under pressure. Human ships were not trying to win the battle. They were learning. Back on the Imperial flagship, Valen noticed something disturbing. Human vessels were slowly spreading around the edges of the formation, not attacking, just appearing in unexpected places, like curious observers. And every time the Empire responded, they revealed another weakness. One of the analysts suddenly spoke. My executor. Valen turned. Yes? The analyst's voice trembled slightly. They are not improvising randomly. What do you mean? They are studying us. Valen stared at the battlefield again. For the first time since the Empire arrived in the solar system, he felt something unfamiliar, a small crack of doubt, because the humans had turned the battlefield into a laboratory, and the Empire had just become the experiment. As the chaotic human fleet continued circling the Imperial Armada, a young Imperial analyst discovered something terrifying in the battle data. Humans were not just learning the Empire's weaknesses, they were predicting their next moves.
Inside the command hall of the Imperial flagship Obsidian Mandate, the atmosphere had changed. Earlier, the officers of the Galactic Empire had watched the battle with confidence. Now they watched with tension. The human fleet was still moving in every direction, like a storm of metal and light. Small ships darted between larger vessels. Strange drones floated through the battlefield. Mining ships and cargo vessels appeared where warships normally should have been. And the worst part? None of it followed normal military logic. High Executor Valen stood silently at the center of the bridge, while the holographic battlefield slowly rotated before him. Report, he ordered.
One of the analysts stepped forward nervously. My executor, the human vessels are adjusting their movements based on our reactions. Valen's eyes narrowed. Explain. The analyst expanded the battle recordings. Every time the Imperial fleet repositioned its weapons, the human ships had already moved before the adjustment completed. Every time the Empire focused fire on one area, the human fleet shifted somewhere else. It looked less like reaction, more like anticipation. Another analyst spoke quietly. They are predicting our tactical patterns. Valen turned slowly. That is impossible. The analyst swallowed. No, my executor. It is happening. He brought up a graph of Imperial battle doctrine. The Empire's strategies had been perfected over thousands of years. Their tactics were flawless, logical, and efficient, but they were also consistent, and consistency could be studied. Across the battlefield, human ships were watching carefully, learning, adapting. Inside the United Earth Defense Command, Admiral Ramirez watched the same data from the other side. A young officer leaned closer to the screen. They're incredibly disciplined, he said. Every ship follows the exact same tactical rules. Ramirez nodded. Yeah. That makes them strong, she smiled slightly, and predictable. Another officer looked curious. You think they'll change tactics? Ramirez shook her head. No Empire ever does. She pointed at the Imperial formation. Perfect systems hate chaos. It breaks their logic. On the battlefield, one of the human vessels suddenly accelerated toward the Imperial fleet. It was not a large ship. In fact, it looked like a modified cargo hauler. The name on its hull read, Unplanned Upgrade. Imperial targeting systems immediately locked onto it. Valen gave the order, destroy that vessel. 3 cannons fired simultaneously, but before the beams reached the ship, it suddenly split apart, not exploding, separating. Sections of the hull detached, revealing smaller craft hidden inside. Each piece shot off in a different direction. Imperial targeting computers struggled to track them all. What just happened? One officer asked in confusion. Another analyst stared at the sensor data. The cargo ship was carrying ships. Meanwhile, inside the human command center, several officers laughed. Old trick, someone said. Works every time. Across the battlefield, more strange events began happening. Human ships appeared briefly behind the Imperial fleet before vanishing again. Others deployed signal interference that made Imperial sensors show false targets. One small vessel even flew directly through the center of the formation while broadcasting cheerful music. The Imperial officers stared at the display in disbelief. "This is not war," one of them muttered. "This is madness." Valen remained silent, but his eyes stayed fixed on the battle data, because something had become clear. The human fleet was not trying to destroy them. Not yet. They were mapping the battlefield, testing every system, measuring every reaction, learning everything. An Imperial analyst suddenly raised his voice. "My executor!" Valen turned. "Yes?" The analyst pointed to a new projection. A prediction model had appeared. It showed the likely future movements of the Imperial fleet based on current doctrine. But beside it, another model existed, a second prediction, this one created from human tactical behavior. And the two models matched perfectly. The analyst's voice trembled. "They know what we will do next." Silence filled the command hall. Across the battlefield, human ships continued their strange movements, but now there was something different about them. They were no longer just reacting, they were guiding the fight, carefully steering the Empire toward positions the humans wanted, like chess players moving pieces on a board. Inside the Imperial flagship, Valen finally spoke. "They are leading us." "Yes, my executor," the analyst whispered. Valen looked back at the human fleet. For the first time since arriving in the solar system, the Empire was no longer controlling the battlefield. The humans were. And somewhere inside the chaos of ships and signals, a trap was slowly closing. As the Imperial fleet realized the humans were predicting their every move, a massive energy spike suddenly appeared near Jupiter, and whatever the humans had built there was powerful enough to change the entire war.
The energy spike appeared suddenly. At first, Imperial sensors thought it was an error. The signal came from far beyond the battlefield, near the orbit of Jupiter. It was massive, far stronger than any reactor the humans had shown so far. Inside the command bridge of the Obsidian Mandate, warning symbols flashed across the tactical display. An officer leaned closer to the console. "My executor, we are detecting a new power source." Valen turned sharply. "Weapon?" The officer hesitated. "We cannot confirm, but the output is extremely high." "How high?" The officer swallowed. "Higher than several of our capital ships combined." The command hall fell silent. Valen stared at the glowing signal on the map. The location was deep within the asteroid fields near Jupiter, where mining operations had been active for decades. Another analyst spoke up. "That area contains multiple human industrial stations." "Mining equipment," another officer added, "not military structures." Valen narrowed his eyes. "Then why does it produce this much energy?" Meanwhile, back in United Earth Defense Command, Admiral Ramirez looked at the same signal. A young technician grinned. "They noticed," Ramirez chuckled. "Took them long enough." The room around her was calm. Officers worked quietly, studying the Imperial fleet as it slowly adjusted formation. One officer looked toward Ramirez. "Admiral, should we activate it?" Ramirez shook her head. "Not yet. But it's ready." "I know, but right now it's more useful as a mystery." Out near Jupiter, the energy source continued growing stronger. Massive structures hidden among the asteroids slowly powered up. Huge circular frames rotated slowly in the darkness of space, surrounded by cargo platforms and industrial machinery. To the Empire, it looked like a giant, unfinished machine. To the humans, it was something else entirely. Back on the Imperial flagship, tension continued rising. Valen watched the sensor readings carefully. "Send a reconnaissance drone," he ordered. A small Imperial probe launched from the fleet and accelerated toward Jupiter. It traveled silently across millions of kilometers of empty space. As it approached the energy source, its sensors began transmitting images. The Imperial command room studied the feed. The object was enormous, larger than any single human ship. Metal frameworks surrounded a huge circular structure floating among the asteroids. Energy pulses traveled along the ring like lightning. One officer whispered quietly, "It looks like a weapon." Another shook his head. "No weapon needs that much structure." The probe moved closer. Suddenly, the feed filled with static. Then, a cheerful human voice appeared on the transmission. "Hey there!" Several Imperial officers jumped in surprise. The voice continued casually. "Nice drone you've got there." Valen leaned forward. "Identify yourself." The human chuckled. "Oh, I'm just the station supervisor." "You are interfering with Imperial reconnaissance." "Yeah, we noticed." The drone cameras shifted slightly. A large industrial station came into view. Ships moved around it like busy workers in a giant construction site. The human voice continued. "You know, it's kind of rude to spy on people's projects." Valen's voice became cold. "What is this structure?" The human paused for a moment, then answered happily. "Oh, this thing? You could call it an experiment." The signal cut off. The drone feed went dark. Inside the Imperial command room, officers exchanged worried glances. Valen stared at the silent display. "Prepare an assault group," he ordered. "If that structure is a weapon, it must be destroyed before it becomes operational." Across the solar system, human ships continued circling the Imperial fleet. But now there was a new element in the battlefield: time.
The longer the Empire waited, the stronger the mysterious structure near Jupiter became. Back in Earth's command center, Ramirez watched the Empire's reaction. "They're getting nervous," an officer said. Ramirez nodded. "Good." Another officer asked carefully, "Admiral, if they attack Jupiter, do we stop them?" Ramirez leaned back in her chair. "Maybe." "Maybe?" She smiled. "Depends how curious they are." Because the truth was simple. The structure near Jupiter was not originally built as a weapon, but humans had a very special talent. They were extremely good at turning tools into surprises. As the Empire prepared to send warships toward Jupiter to destroy the mysterious structure, Imperial sensors suddenly detected something impossible. Thousands of hidden human ships were already waiting there. The Imperial assault group moved toward Jupiter with perfect precision. 20 warships separated from the main fleet and accelerated across the dark vacuum of space. Their engines glowed bright blue as they moved in flawless formation, weapons charging slowly. Inside the command bridge of the Obsidian Mandate, High Executor Valen watched their progress. "This will end their little experiment," he said calmly. Several officers nodded. If the strange structure near Jupiter was a weapon, destroying it early would remove the threat. It was standard Imperial strategy: eliminate the enemy's strongest tools before they could be used. The warships approached the asteroid fields where the energy signal had originated. For several minutes, nothing unusual appeared. Then the sensors started blinking. One officer leaned forward. "My executor, we are detecting movement." Valen narrowed his eyes. "How many vessels?" The officer hesitated. "At first, we thought it was debris. But it's not debris." The display zoomed in. Thousands of tiny signals began appearing around the asteroid belt. Not large warships, not organized fleets. Small ships, very small ships. Mining craft, cargo shuttles, maintenance drones, old civilian transports. Valen stared at the map. "They are not combat vessels." "No, my executor," the officer replied slowly. "But there are many of them." Meanwhile, deep inside the asteroid field, hundreds of human pilots sat quietly inside their ships. Some were professional soldiers, others were miners, engineers, cargo pilots, private contractors. None of them looked worried. One pilot stretched in his chair and spoke over the open comms. "Okay, everybody remember the plan?" A woman's voice answered. "Step 1, don't panic." Another pilot laughed. "Step 2, make them panic." The Imperial warships continued forward. Their scanners analyzed the human ships quickly. "Weapons detected on several vessels," one officer reported, "but most appear lightly armed." Valen gave a simple command: "Clear the field." The Imperial cannons fired. Bright beams cut across the asteroid belt. Several small human ships exploded instantly. Others scattered in different directions. For a moment, the Empire believed the situation was under control. Then the human swarm moved. Hundreds of human ships accelerated at once. Not toward the Imperial fleet, around it. They wove between asteroids, vanished behind rocks, then reappeared somewhere unexpected. Some ships released clouds of reflective particles. Others deployed small drones that copied the signal signatures of larger ships. Suddenly, Imperial sensors were overwhelmed. "Multiple false targets detected. Tracking systems overloaded." Another officer shouted, "Asteroids are moving!" Valen looked closer. They were not natural movements. Human ships had attached engines to several asteroids. The rocks slowly drifted into new positions, blocking targeting lines and scattering sensor signals. Inside the human fleet, the pilots were enjoying themselves. One engineer laughed over the comms. "Whoever put thrusters on that rock is a genius," another voice answered.
Don't thank me yet. Wait until the big ships try to shoot through it. Moments later, an Imperial beam cannon fired. The blast struck the asteroid. Thousands of fragments scattered everywhere. Several Imperial ships suddenly lost sensor lock completely. Their computers struggled to track targets through the cloud of debris. The human swarm grew even more chaotic. Some ships pretended to attack, then pulled away. Others drifted silently while their drones created fake movement across sensors. And slowly, quietly, the Imperial warships were being separated. Not destroyed, separated. One ship drifted too far from the group while chasing a false target. Two others moved apart while avoiding drifting asteroids. Within minutes, the perfect Imperial formation had broken. Back on the flagship, Valen's voice became sharp. Reform the assault group. But it was difficult. Human ships kept interrupting, distracting, blocking, confusing. They were not trying to win a battle. They were creating chaos. Inside Earth's command center, Admiral Ramirez watched the battle unfold near Jupiter. A young officer shook his head in amazement. Those aren't even military ships. Nope, Ramirez said. They're volunteers. Another officer smiled. Civilians? Ramirez nodded. Turns out miners are really good at fighting inside asteroid fields, especially when the asteroids start fighting back. Back in the Imperial flagship, Valen realized something important. The humans had not gathered a fleet near Jupiter. They had gathered a community. Thousands of independent pilots, each doing something small, each creating confusion, together forming something impossible to control. And all the time, the mysterious structure near Jupiter continued building energy. As the Imperial warship struggled inside the chaotic asteroid swarm, the massive structure near Jupiter suddenly activated, and the Empire realized the humans had not built a weapon, they had built something far dangerous.
The structure near Jupiter finally activated. Across the solar system, every major sensor, human and Imperial, detected the same thing at the exact same moment. A deep pulse of energy rolled outward like a quiet wave through space. Inside the Imperial flagship, Obsidian Mandate, alarms began flashing across every console. Energy surge detected. Power output increasing. Valen stood up sharply. Is it firing? One analyst quickly scanned the readings. No, my executor. Then what is it doing? The analyst looked confused. It's stabilizing. Across the massive circular structure near Jupiter, enormous metal rings rotated slowly. Bright streams of energy flowed along the framework like glowing rivers. For weeks, the Empire had assumed the structure was some kind of experimental weapon, but as the readings continued, something became clear. It was not charging for destruction. It was doing something else entirely. The station supervisor's voice suddenly appeared again on the Imperial communication channels. "Hey there again." Several Imperial officers turned toward the speakers. "You are interfering with Imperial operations," Valen said coldly. The human sounded amused. "Yeah, you keep saying that." Valen ignored the comment. "What is the purpose of that structure?" The human paused for a moment, then answered casually, "It's a gate." Silence fell across the command bridge. "A gate?" Valen repeated. "Yep. A transportation device?" "Exactly." The human sounded proud. "See, the distance between stars is kind of annoying. Takes forever to travel normally. So, we built shortcuts." Valen stared at the sensor data again. The power readings were enormous. "You constructed a faster-than-light transit gate?" "Technically, it's a prototype, still a work in progress." One of the Imperial analysts whispered in disbelief. "A primitive civilization built a stargate." Another officer spoke nervously. "My executor, if they complete it, they could move fleets instantly across their system." Valen's mind began calculating the implications. A civilization that could move ships instantly, that could appear anywhere, that could defend every point of their territory at once. The Empire had expected to conquer a scattered young species. Instead, they might be facing something far more dangerous.
Meanwhile, near Jupiter, the human civilian swarm continued distracting the Imperial assault group. Asteroids drifted slowly between the warships. Drones bounced signal reflections across sensors. Small ships zipped in unpredictable directions. And in the center of it all, the giant ring continued powering up. Inside the United Earth Defense Command, Admiral Ramirez watched the display carefully. The gate's power level was rising steadily. "Status?" she asked. An engineer answered immediately. "Stabilization at 80%. "Good." Another officer looked curious. "Admiral, are we actually planning to use it during the battle?" Ramirez shrugged. "We built it. Might as well test it." The Blink officer blinked. "You're serious?" She smiled. "When humans build something experimental, the first test is usually during a crisis." Back near Jupiter, the Imperial assault ships were still trying to reorganize their formation, but every time they aligned properly, something interrupted them. An asteroid, a false signal, a fast-moving human ship. Valen watched the chaos from the flagship. "They are buying time," he said slowly. One analyst nodded. "Yes, my executor." "For the gate." Valen's voice became firm. "Destroy it immediately." The order reached the assault group near Jupiter. Imperial warships turned their weapons toward the enormous ring. Energy cannons began charging. Inside the asteroid field, the human pilots noticed immediately. One miner spoke over the comms. "Well, here comes the exciting part." Another pilot laughed. "Good thing the engineers finished the shield." "Mostly finished," someone corrected. Then the Imperial fleet fired. Bright beams of energy streaked toward the giant structure, but before they could reach it, the gate activated again. A brilliant blue ripple spread across the ring. Space itself seemed to bend slightly. Then something appeared inside the circle. At first, it looked like a distant star. Then it grew larger, closer. Ships began emerging through the glowing ring. Dozens of them, then hundreds, not just human military vessels, cargo ships, defense cruisers, research craft, mining ships, colonial transports. Every human settlement across the solar system was suddenly connected. They were all arriving at once. Inside the Imperial flagship, shock spread across the command bridge. Valen whispered slowly, "They can move their entire civilization instantly." And the human voice returned over the channel. "Yeah," the supervisor said cheerfully, "we thought it might come in handy." Because the Empire had expected to fight a single planet. Instead, the entire solar system had just arrived for the battle. As thousands of human ships poured through the newly activated gate, the Imperial fleet realized something terrifying. This wasn't just reinforcement. It was the moment when humans finally stopped laughing. For the first time since the Galactic Empire arrived in the solar system, human communication channels went quiet. No jokes, no music, no casual chatter. Just calm, steady voices. Inside the Imperial flagship Obsidian Mandate, High Executor Valen noticed the change immediately. "Human transmissions have decreased," an officer reported. Valen studied the battlefield carefully. The gate near Jupiter continued glowing softly as ships emerged from it in an endless stream. Thousands of vessels now filled the system, but something had changed about them. Earlier, the human fleet had looked chaotic. Now it looked coordinated, not organized like the Empire's perfect formations, but synchronized in a different way. Ships moved independently, yet their actions supported one another. Cargo vessels distributed supplies. Mining ships repositioned asteroids into defensive barriers. Research craft deployed sensor networks across the system. Military ships quietly took positions between planets, moons, and stations. It was less like a fleet and more like an ecosystem. Inside Earth's command center, Admiral Ramirez watched the situation unfold. An officer beside her spoke quietly. "The gate is stable. Every colony has access." Ramirez nodded. "Good." Another officer asked carefully, "Admiral, should we begin Phase 2? Ramirez looked at the Imperial fleet. They were still powerful, still dangerous, but now they were surrounded by a solar system that had suddenly become much more connected. "Yes," Ramirez said calmly, "Phase 2. Across the system, human ships began executing a new set of instructions. Still no large attack, still no massive battle. Instead, dozens of small operations started at once. Near Mars, several engineering ships deployed signal towers that disrupted Imperial long-range communication. Near Saturn, sensor buoys created false navigation data that confused Imperial mapping systems. Closer to Earth, fast interceptor ships quietly cut off the paths Imperial vessels could use to retreat. Inside the Obsidian Mandate, alarms began appearing across the tactical display. Communication disruption detected, navigation interference increasing, supply channels compromised. Valen's expression darkened. "They are isolating us." An analyst nervously nodded. "Yes, my executor." The human fleet was not attacking directly. They were slowly removing the Empire's advantages. Every empire depended on three things: communication, supply, and control. The humans were dismantling all three. Meanwhile, the Imperial assault group near Jupiter finally managed to regroup. Their commander reported immediately, "My executor, we request permission to withdraw and rejoin the main fleet." Valen hesitated. That request alone would have been unthinkable before, but now, permission granted. The assault ships turned and began retreating from the asteroid field. Human civilian ships did not pursue aggressively, they simply watched. A miner's voice came across the open comms. "Hey, they're leaving." Another pilot replied, "Good, less traffic out here." Back in the Imperial flagship, Valen studied the entire solar system map. Human ships were everywhere, not in threatening clusters, just present, near planets, near moons, near supply routes, watching, waiting. It was a subtle strategy, but it carried a clear message. The Empire no longer controlled the battlefield. A young Imperial officer spoke nervously. "My executor, if they attack all at once, our fleet could be overwhelmed." Valen remained silent, because the officer was correct, but the humans were not attacking. They were doing something worse. They were proving they didn't need to. After several long minutes, Valen opened a communication channel to Earth. Admiral Ramirez appeared on screen. This time she was not laughing. Her expression was calm, professional, respectful. "You wanted to talk earlier," she said. Valen studied her carefully. "Yes." "You have demonstrated unexpected capabilities." Ramirez leaned back in her chair. "We've had a lot of practice." Valen paused, then spoke slowly. "The Empire proposes a negotiation." Ramirez leaned back in her chair. "That depends." "On what?" She smiled faintly. "Are you still planning to conquer us?" Valen did not answer immediately, because the truth had become painfully clear. The Empire had expected fear. Instead, they had found resilience. They had expected submission. Instead, they had found curiosity. And now they faced something they had never truly encountered before: a civilization that refused to play by the rules of empire. Ramirez spoke again, her voice calm. "You know," she said, "most empires make the same mistake." Valen narrowed his eyes. "And what mistake is that?" "They assume power comes from being the strongest." She paused. "For humans, power usually comes from being the most stubborn." Silence filled the communication channel. Then Ramirez added gently, "So, what happens next?" Valen looked at the tactical display one more time. The Empire was no longer dominating the solar system. They were surrounded by it. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Galactic Empire had to consider something they had never seriously considered before: peace.
As negotiations began between humanity and the Galactic Empire, an unexpected signal arrived from across the galaxy. Dozens of former Imperial worlds were rising in rebellion after seeing humans stand up to the Empire.
The signal arrived from far beyond the solar system. At first, it looked like normal background communication traffic, small bursts of data traveling between distant star systems. But Imperial monitoring stations quickly noticed something unusual. The signals were multiplying. Inside the bridge of the Obsidian Mandate, a communications officer spoke urgently. "My executor, we are receiving transmissions from several Imperial territories." Valen turned slowly. "Status reports." The officer hesitated. "No, my executor." "Then what?" "Rebellion." A new display filled the center of the command hall. Dozens of Imperial systems were flashing red, one by one, like lights turning on across the galaxy. An analyst expanded the reports. "Vassal worlds are refusing tribute payments. Local fleets are ignoring Imperial orders. Civilian networks are spreading human transmissions." Valen narrowed his eyes. "Human transmissions?" The officer nodded. "Yes, my executor." Several recordings appeared on the screen. Clips of the human fleet surrounding the Imperial Armada, footage of the chaotic asteroid battle near Jupiter, memes mocking the Empire's failed intimidation attempts, and most importantly, videos of humans laughing in the face of annihilation. Across the galaxy, oppressed civilizations were watching those recordings, and they were realizing something they had forgotten. The Empire could be challenged. One Imperial historian whispered quietly, "My executor, fear is collapsing." Valen looked at the data. For centuries, the Empire had ruled through inevitability. No one resisted because resistance seemed pointless. But now a small young civilization had done something dangerous. They had refused to be afraid, and the entire galaxy had noticed. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Ramirez received the same reports. An officer looked shocked. "Admiral, systems across the Empire are revolting." Ramirez folded her arms thoughtfully. "That was faster than I expected." "You expected this?" She nodded. "When people see someone stand up to a bully, they realize they can do it too." The officer looked back at the data. More worlds were rebelling by the minute. Some systems had already seized control of Imperial supply depots. Others had begun dismantling Imperial command centers, and many were broadcasting the same message across their networks. Laughter. It had become a symbol. Not mockery, defiance. Back on the Imperial flagship, tension filled the command bridge. One officer spoke nervously. "My executor, if the fleet withdraws now, we may still stabilize the outer territories." Another added quietly, "If we remain here, the rebellion may spread further." Valen stared at the holographic map of the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was facing instability on a massive scale. And strangely, the humans had not even attacked them directly. Admiral Ramirez appeared again on the communication channel. She had clearly received the same information. "Well," she said calmly, "looks like you've got a busy day." Valen studied her carefully. "Did you plan this?" She shook her head. "No." "Then why is this happening?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because fear works until it doesn't." Valen did not respond. Ramirez continued. "You built your empire by convincing everyone resistance was impossible. But the moment someone proves that wrong," she gestured toward the tactical display showing the spreading rebellions, "the whole system starts to crack." Inside the command hall, the Imperial officers looked uneasy, because the human admiral was correct. The Empire had always believed its greatest weapon was power, but now it was clear. Their greatest weapon had always been belief, and that belief was breaking. Valen finally spoke again. "If we withdraw, will your forces pursue us?" Ramirez shook her head. "No." "Why not?" "Because conquering people isn't our thing." She paused slightly. "Besides, looks like the galaxy has other plans for you." Across the Imperial Command Bridge, officers continued receiving reports. More rebellions, more lost systems, more laughter spreading across alien networks. The Empire had arrived expecting a simple conquest. Instead, they had triggered something far larger, a galaxy that had suddenly remembered what freedom looked like. Valen slowly turned away from the display. For the first time in his long career, the path forward was uncertain, and uncertainty was something the Galactic Empire had never handled well. As rebellion spread across the galaxy and the Imperial fleet prepared to leave the solar system, High Executor Valen made one final request to humanity. He wanted to understand why humans laughed when everyone else would have surrendered.
The Imperial fleet was preparing to leave the solar system. Engines warmed quietly across hundreds of warships. Navigation routes were calculated for a long journey back through the stars. For the first time in Imperial history, a conquest fleet was retreating without victory. Inside the flagship Obsidian Mandate, High Executor Valen stood alone for a moment, looking at the distant blue glow of Earth. A young civilization, primitive compared to the Empire, and yet everything had changed because of them. "Open a channel to Admiral Ramirez," Valen ordered. Moments later, her image appeared again on the communication screen. She looked relaxed, as if the most powerful empire in the galaxy leaving her system was just another busy day at work. "You needed something?" she asked. Valen studied her carefully. "Yes." Ramirez waited. For once there was no joke, no laughter, just curiosity. Valen spoke slowly. "Throughout this conflict, your species behaved strangely." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "That's one way to say it." "You laughed when we threatened you." "Yes." "You laughed during battle." "Yes." "You laughed when destruction seemed inevitable." Ramirez leaned back in her chair. "Yeah, we do that." Valen paused. "For many species, laughter is a response to comfort, to safety. For you, it appears during danger." Ramirez nodded. "That's pretty accurate." Valen finally asked the question that had been bothering the Empire since the first day. "Why?" The room behind Ramirez was quiet as she considered the answer. Finally, she said, "Because fear is exhausting." Valen said nothing. Ramirez continued. "Look, when something scary happens, humans get two choices: panic or deal with it." She folded her arms. "Laughing helps with the second one." Valen tilted his head slightly. "You treat existential threats as humor?" "Not exactly," Ramirez said. "We treat them like problems." She leaned forward a little. "Humans mess up a lot." Valen noticed a faint smile. "We break things, blow things up, fail experiments, crash vehicles, start arguments, make terrible decisions." Valen had already seen plenty of evidence of that. Ramirez continued, "But here's the thing. Every time we fail, we learn something." She gestured toward the battlefield display behind her. "The reason we laughed when you arrived wasn't because you weren't dangerous. It's because we've faced impossible situations before, and we survived them." Valen looked at the distant stars. "You believe survival is inevitable?" Ramirez shook her head. "No, we believe survival is worth trying for." She smiled slightly.
And if things go wrong, well, at least we got a good story out of it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Across the solar system, Imperial ships slowly began leaving orbit. Their engines created quiet flashes of light as they entered long-distance travel. Valen watched them go. "You have changed the galaxy," he said quietly. Ramirez shrugged. "Honestly, we just showed up." "But the rebellions—" "Those worlds were already unhappy," she interrupted gently. "They just needed someone to prove the Empire wasn't unstoppable." Valen nodded slowly. For centuries, the Empire had ruled through intimidation, but humanity had revealed a simple weakness in that strategy. Fear only works until someone stops believing in it. Valen looked back at Ramirez. "You could have destroyed us." Ramirez shook her head. "That wouldn't solve anything." "And conquest does?" Valen did not answer, because now he was no longer certain. Ramirez gave a small wave. "Safe trip home." Valen hesitated. Then something unusual happened. The High Executor of the Galactic Empire made a small sound. It was awkward, unfamiliar, but unmistakable. A short, quiet laugh. Ramirez grinned. "There you go," she said. "You're getting the hang of it." The channel closed. The Imperial fleet disappeared slowly into the stars. But across the galaxy, things were only beginning to change. As the Empire retreated and the galaxy reshaped itself, a new question began spreading among countless civilizations. If humans could face an empire and laugh, what other impossible things might they accomplish next?
The Imperial fleet vanished into the darkness between the stars. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Empire had retreated from a system it failed to conquer. Their enormous warships slowly disappeared into hyperspace, leaving the solar system quiet again. But the silence did not last long. Across the galaxy, news traveled faster than ships. The recordings of the confrontation spread from world to world. Civilizations that had lived under Imperial rule for generations watched the footage again and again. Humans laughing at the Empire's threats. Humans dancing around the Imperial fleet with strange ships and unpredictable tactics. Humans building a Stargate while the Empire tried to intimidate them. And most unbelievable of all, the Empire leaving. Entire planets gathered in public squares to watch the recordings. Alien species with completely different cultures and histories saw the same strange moment. A young civilization refusing to be afraid. At first, many of them did not understand it. Then, slowly, something began changing. On a distant ocean world once ruled by imperial governors, a group of students replayed the moment when Admiral Ramirez joked with High Executive Valen. One of the students laughed quietly, not mockingly, just freely, and that small laugh spread across the room. On another planet, an old merchant watched the footage in his shop. For years, he had paid heavy tribute taxes to imperial collectors. He had never imagined life without them. But now he watched the moment when the Imperial fleet retreated. He smiled. "Maybe things can change," he said softly. Meanwhile, back in the solar system, life slowly returned to normal. Human ships continued moving through the new gate near Jupiter. Cargo vessels transported supplies between planets in minutes instead of weeks. Scientists celebrated the success of the experimental project. Miners joked that the gate had accidentally started a revolution. At the United Earth Defense Command, Admiral Ramirez finally had time to relax. She stood near the large observation window, watching ships pass through Earth's orbit. An officer walked in carrying a tablet full of reports. "You should see this," he said. Ramirez glanced at the screen. It showed dozens of systems declaring independence from imperial control. Some had formed alliances with neighbors. Others were simply celebrating their freedom. Ramirez shook her head with a quiet smile. we didn't plan any of this." The officer laughed. "Turns out courage is contagious." She handed the tablet back. "Let's just hope they don't start building their own empires." The officer grinned. "If they do, we'll probably hear about it." "How?" He smiled. "Someone will laugh at them." Months later, far away from the solar system, High Executive Valen recorded a final personal log. His empire was changing. Some territories had broken away. Others were reforming their governments. The old structure of fear was weakening. But strangely, Valen did not feel anger. He had learned something important during the encounter with humanity. Power built on fear could control people, but it could never inspire them. Valen finished his log with a final observation. Humans do not defeat their enemies by proving they are stronger. They defeat them by proving the rules can change. He paused, then added one final sentence. If a human laughs at you, you still have a chance, because it means they believe you can learn. But if humans stop laughing, he remembered the quiet moment when Admiral Ramirez had become serious, the calm coordination of the human fleet, the moment the entire solar system stood together. Valen shook his head slowly. Then it means they have already solved the problem. Years later, a new saying spread across thousands of star systems. It appeared in different languages, different cultures, but the meaning remained the same. If a human laughs at you, relax. If they stop laughing, you should start worrying. And somewhere in the galaxy, whenever a powerful ruler stood up and declared themselves unstoppable, a human voice would usually appear somewhere nearby, calm, cheerful, and slightly amused. Hold on. Before you start conquering everything, did you read our history first? And then, just like that day when the Galactic Empire arrived at Earth, the humans would laugh. The end. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.